love me, but thank you. I'm talking about this awesome Moonbird right here. Taking a look at that, that is Dave Toronto's Moonbird. And very excited to do this commission for Dave. First of all, it's an awesome bird. Second of all, he came up with a very cool backstory for this particular Moonbird. And I'm excited to dive into it. So I've done some sketches, and I'm going to walk you through that a little bit. And then we'll get into some actual kind of drawing and starting to put this guy together. So I'm back in Clip Studio for this, in Clip Studio Paint, and going to shift over to that right now. So here in Clip Studio, here is the original Moonbird, and what I've actually done is zoom way in. Actually, I'm going to hide this one for a minute because I want to show you a little bit of the process to get here. So talking to Dave, accepting this commission, which I don't do a ton of commissions, but I'm open to it occasionally. And having worked on the Moonbird Macronaut piece, doing a couple of other one-on-ones from the Macroverse community. And when Dave asked me to do this, I thought it would be very fun to take this on as another Moonbird, kind of on the way to the Moonbirds comic series and franchise that we're working on as well. So I had a couple of initial ideas, very early on, this kind of idea of like the wings all both up, but it's felt a little too static. I want to do something a little more dynamic with it. Another version, this one would be a little more focused on the goggles, and so the idea, this visor, the idea would be that there'd be kind of a really intense kind of gleam, almost a little more Cyclops from X-Men kind of idea. But ultimately, we landed on this one that's a little more, to me, feels a little more Batman-ish, like a little more kind of Cape Crusader, action with the wing up in the front, a little more dynamic pose for the bird here. And then after talking to Dave in DMs, I had initially thought, I know the skull is very much a part of this particular bird, but it felt a little weird for me to put it on his head here. So we agreed we're going to include it in the piece as almost like a little sidekick, which I think is going to be really fun. So I haven't put that in yet, but it'll end up in the final art as well, kind of floating in the background here. Not in the background, but kind of next to the avenging Moonbird that we have here. So this is basically my rough layout. Next step for me will be to make a little more refined version of the drawing, and then we'll go on to inking and finishing along the lines of some of the other stuff that you've seen from me here. As a side note, my name is Evan Matthews. I'm the co-founder of Macroverse. And, started my career as an illustrator and character designer, concept artist, making all kinds of fun, creative stuff at a agency for a decade where we were very much in the kind of high-end interactive world when Flash was taking over the universe, and have done everything from animation, film, TV, gaming, comics, all kinds of fun stuff over the course of my career, pre-Web3 and Macroverse, and then very much also in Web3 through Macroverse. So anyhow, on to the kind of refining of this drawing. So make a new layer. There we go. Part of the interesting thing with Moonbirds is that, we're still kind of figuring out, you can see this in the Mythics explorations too, that you're kind of figuring out what the proportions of these characters are as they become more rendered characters and not just the 3D the pixel art versions that we know and love in the original collection. One of the things I like about this visor, like the design of it, at least my interpretation of the design of it via the pixel art version, is the way that it, number one, kind of wraps around, and number two, the design of the the bottom portion of it actually has this kind of, almost like the red part extends here, and then the frame comes around within that. So I kind of like that. A little bit of a unique design element. So, Dave had this idea that this character is essentially kind of a superhero-esque type of character. I'm going to definitely lean into that in the pose and in the final style of this. But I think the visor is such an important part that you want to get that very much right here. And this get the rounded edges that are here in the original. But really like this particular bird as well. It's a really fun one and a great combination. One of the things that's going to be fun and a little challenging in the final art for this is that it needs to have this kind of very light, clean color palette, which is awesome, but also means that the light and shadow will be a little more subtle than in something that isn't quite as delicate. I guess kind of just the contrast of light and shadow won't be as dramatic, is the word I'm looking for, as it might be in some other pieces. But I do like these kind of horns that this guy has, and kind of lends himself to this slightly Batman-ish pose. It's kind of almost Batman the Animated Series kind of a treatment here. And we're going to see just a little bit of the bird's back going back here, connecting into this in the shoulder. One of the things that's interesting is kind of like figuring out, you can kind of see it in the mythics too. Like it's not 100% bird anatomy, like real bird anatomy. It's certainly not human anatomy, but there's kind of a little wiggle room for both. And I want to really use this kind of sweep, this kind of curve here to create this kind of, the way it kind of leads your eye in and around the rest of the piece. I want to lean into that for this shape. And then what I also want to do is have the feathers kind of coming right at you here. So, again, sort of abstracting this a little bit into how the shoulder works and how we're going to do this kind of dynamic way that the wing is kind of spread out towards us. In this part, almost like the cape kind of coming right at us, but then the rest of the wing tying into the body, which is kind of coming back here. And we'll get kind of a little shoulder of the other wing, which we could assume might be kind of back. So it's almost like he's doing something like this a little bit. Just kind of getting some of that, how the perspective is going to kind of get more dramatic as it's going out. And then there's some bird body in here, which won't be too worried about defining too much since it's kind of under the wing, and we really want the focus to be this wing in the foreground and the visor, and then getting our little skelly companion in there. You can hear a little frustration from my 7-year-old in the background, playing some kind of game today, I'm sure. All right, so that's pretty close to what we need for the more refined drawing. I'll want to figure out that wing a little bit more before we go straight to inking. So I think it's mostly about, I did pull a little reference of an owl wing too, just to be able to see. Obviously the wing is in a very different position, but just to get a little clearer picture of the anatomy of it as it connects to the body, and then kind of extrapolating from that. So this part kind of being down in here. Part of why I sometimes go back and forth between red and blue is it helps to just distinguish new lines from old lines. And I don't want to go black because we'll be using black initially for the inking. Yep. Saving is always good. Auto saving is good. Manual saving is good. Lots of saving is good. All right. So, the wings have this kind of concentric circles. So this part is actually kind of coming in here. And then this is actually a feather, which will then be, so you can already see like I've got some good lines, but I want to get this more organized around being actual feathers. And then there's even more to consider here. I don't know, I might have to go find a more specific wing reference considering the pose that I've got here. I probably will do that before I finish it entirely. Yeah, because I definitely have a sense of it, but this is one of those things where like you can abstract it to a great deal, but you also want to actually really have a understanding of the anatomy. So I think like this part all works and is a good place to kind of apply that abstraction, but still want to make sure that it makes sense for that it feels like a real wing, that it's not just a mess, so to speak. So I probably will go and do that. What I'll focus on over the course of this stream, since I do want to find that additional reference, probably won't see that part. What I'll focus on is the part that I know for sure, which is the head and getting the companion in there. So I think that's the way we'll approach this. And then between seeing this part of the stream and if I do a part 2, get the wing in there. If not, it may just be that you see that part worked out in the finishing stages, wherever this comes back in. So what I do also want to do is get a little bit of, get our skelly friend in here. Actually, I'll do him on a separate layer. Layers are also our friends, for sure. And actually, since our bird is looking down, we'll make our skelly looking up. that'll also kind of reinforce the notion that he's flying above. All right, so that's actually probably enough, for me to be able to draw that. Let's hide this and see how that feels. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. So it still has a relationship to his head without actually being like a hat, which was the part that I was struggling with a little bit in this context. And of course you could just do it, but it felt like it was more fun to have this action moment with the character to me. So, okay, cool. I'm into that. All right. So what I like to do now is actually take all of this. Oops. Take all take all of this and put it in a folder. And we'll call that pencils. Of course, it's all just pixels, but call it pencils. And then I'll make a new folder for inks. Talked about this on previous streams, but I like to keep things pretty layered because it just makes it, way easier. It takes us a slight bit, more time in the actual drawing, but it makes things way easier to manipulate and alter as everything moves forward. So even though, I don't know, maybe I'll take a stab at the wing and see how it comes out, but I may ultimately modify it quite a bit after I find some additional owl wing reference. But as I said, we don't necessarily need that to go forward today. Last time, you guys, if you watched me draw the Bushido especially, I was really struggling with, number one, finding the brush that I wanted to use. And then number two, with the some of the lines I was putting down, which took multiple tries to find what I wanted for that. And I tend to go for, I have a lot of brushes, you can see, but I tend to go for something that's pretty standard. I do want it to have kind of a thick to thin, which is also pressure sensitive here, but I want to find something that's pretty slick for this, especially. So not a textured line for this guy. And you can just see me kind of play with different brushes until I find one that I want to use. Oh, maybe a brush pen. I like a real brush pen. So let's make the size quite a bit smaller and see how we feel about that. Oh, I might be into that. Let's try the brush pen today. Feels pretty nice. All right. So I'm not going to worry about the skull just yet, and he's going to ultimately be on his own layer as well. So let's just start kind of again with the visor here. And that's way too thick then, going that way. So is that different than if I go? It is. Interesting. All right. And that's why we're not going to use that brush pen. Let's see about Brush Simpson. Yeah, see, you can see the shape of the nib, and I could go and modify this, but really just looking for one that is pretty consistent both directions. Okay, that feels pretty good. Let's try that. I do want these particular pieces to have a bit of a thicker line when I want it to be thick, because one of the things that is so effective about a PFP type of an image is that it reads really well when it gets small. And part of that is contrast, and part of that is generally having a bit of a thicker line when you see it at this larger scale. So let's try again. Yeah, I think this is going to be more like it. Actually, it's still doing something kind of funky with the shape of the line. Did I end up using the letter last time? No. No, you can see pretty much immediately when I see it's an oblong brush shape, it's not what I want for this kind of thing. Nope. Let's see. Maybe hearing some kids in the background. Let's see. No, there were pictographs. I looked at that before. I feel like I might have ended up. No. Let's see if I just go with a regular pen. Calligraphy. Let's try this kind of regular pen. Yeah, that might be the answer. All right, let's try that again. Okay, yeah, already feeling like I like this better. All right. That's feeling better. All right, so sometimes it's just going back to basics. Like this is just one of the main basic tools that Clip Studio comes with. Let's see. Yeah. One where it's like the angle's not quite right. There we go. Yep. Got my hand on the undo key while I'm doing this kind of stuff because sometimes the lines just feel like they're coming out perfect and sometimes they don't. And sometimes it takes multiple tries to get it where I want it. Okay. Oh boy. Nope. And sometimes the eraser is our friend. Oops. Much smaller. Okay. I did consider putting on some music, and maybe I'll try that at some point, but I was thinking, when this goes out on the streams, didn't want to necessarily have it get flagged for having in music that we're not supposed to have in. I'm probably going to just do this with color, but I give myself just a little bit of a guide here. All right. All right, and this is one where also turning the canvas can help with this kind of alignment. Just puts the making of the line in a slightly more comfortable angle. Okay. That's feeling pretty good to me for the visor. Maybe this part just gets a little thicker over here. But I didn't like how that looked, so I think I got to go back to turning the canvas so that I can just get that a little more at a comfortable angle. Yep. And save. All right, so we've got a visor. Woohoo! Now I think we go on to beak, which will also be on a separate layer. I'm going to put that under the visor. And a lot will happen in the color stage, so I'm not going to do too much here in the line work, but a couple little things. A lot of this for me is kind of containers for what I'm going to do in color. I think that his ears and head and all that will be basically one layer. So I probably will adjust the color of some of this line work when we get to it. So that's the other reason that I'm keeping them kind of in the same categories, like, you know, the line work of the visor, for example, versus the beak versus his head, potentially versus the wing. Like, you know, some of that may get adjusted in the finish. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it will. That's an example of where I think the line work works pretty well. This is what I'm after, is when I can get these nice smooth lines. Whoops. Unlike that one. Unlike that one. And a lot of thick to thin. So the way I think about the kind of thick to thin lines, which is a very much a comic thing, as well as other types of illustration, but you know, I think of it as a little bit like perspective. So if something is closer to me, it's a little bit of a thicker line. If it's further away, it's a thinner line. So I think that often, as a rule of thumb, tends to work pretty well. This is a good opportunity for another turn of the canvas. Whoops. Nope, didn't change anything. Okay, feeling pretty good about this guy right now. Good start. Okay, just making sure I was in fact keeping that on a separate layer. All right, so that's pretty good. Now we're going to want to bring that wing onto another layer in the front. And since it is absolutely the closest to us, we'll pull that in to the top layer here. Okay. Don't love that. It's a little bit too much like a little thumb or something. And again, I think I'm gonna pull some additional reference for owl wings at this angle as opposed to the other one that I had. But this will give us that curve at least. Oops. Oops. Nope. It's just that being not quite dark enough. There we go. Nope. Nope. Well, let's see. Am I recording this one? I hope so. Time lapse. Okay, good. We're recording the time lapse. That's cool. So then you'll be able to share the whole process, whether I stream all of it or not. So I try to remember to do that because it's pretty fun to see. Okay. Actually, I don't want to do that because this is a separate layer. We don't want to combine those. All right, so that'll be our wing, and then the back of the body I'm also going to do separately down here, which will be this part. Okay. So yeah, I'm feeling more and more like I need a little additional wing reference. So this might be a relatively short part of this initial piece because I do want to make sure I get that right and it looks right. We'll go ahead and put in the Skelly guy. Skelly friend. What do we? Skelly friend. Is that could be the official sidekick's name? All right, I'm gonna do that even on a further back layer. And then I guess, I want to ask Dave before I do the complete finish on this. He's got his day one Nestor background there at the moment. I wonder if we want to use that or if we want to use a different background, like, I don't know, like the Moonlight or Proof Collective or, something else as the inspiration for the background here. The day one of the things that the day one Nestor background is very cool about, especially with this white bird, is it does give it this very cohesive, again, sort of bright, low contrast, but very nice color palette where the red of the glasses, the visor really pops. So I could certainly make an argument for keeping that, but I want to check with him on what his preference is there. All right, we're to the Skelly guy. And I'm going to try to keep, he's basically got 3 teeth. Instead of making him like a full realistic skeleton, I want to try to keep the character, pun intended, of this guy. I also don't want to make his lines too thick because he is in the background. We got 3 teeth. And I'll basically do the rest with color here. Okay, I think he's kind of fun. All right, so wing finish aside, let's just hide the pencils. I think it's a pretty good start for what's going to be a pretty dynamic finish. But you can see, you know, one of the things that's a little deceptive with my work in particular, I can do much more finished inks that are meant to be more, you know, black and white, rendering. But I am a lot using this at this point for kind of containers for the color finish that I'm going to do. So it almost feels a little stripped down, more so than some of my earlier work in my career might. So anyway, take that for whatever it's worth. But we're heading towards, I think, what's going to end up being a really cool finished piece of art here. So I'm going to go find some owl wing reference and come back and finish that. Maybe I'll jump back on for a little more recording, or maybe I'll just do that part and then jump on for part of the finish. But here is part one of Dave Toronto's Moonbird, a very cool burb indeed. And with that, I'll pause and we'll be back later. Thank you. Oh, and yes, I have to click the button that says I want to stop recording. Everybody have a